grew up here in Chico, did leave for 20 years there to pursue her own career, returned here. She told me this morning her first trip to the Bidwell Mansion was back in 1968, just at the point where the state of California has determined to move the state ownership of the mansion from the Department of Education, where the mansion had been a dormitory and then classrooms for Chico State. Now, after some even 10 years of lobbying by Chico people for the state to recognize the historic importance of the Bidwell story. And so now the state is going to put the mansion into the Department of Recreation and Parks, and it will become a California State Historic Monument. So when Sondra arrived in '68 and made her first visit to the mansion with her Aunt Nancy as just a young youth there, the mansion was just in the first little time of transition, and it was not yet really redecorated, repainted, and so again, we'll hear a little on that. But again, Sondra would come back to Chico later in life and become, one of the things she became here was a tour guide there at the mansion, and would serve there from 2013, I believe, until
2024.
2024. And so really this story that she's going to tell us today came out of that time as a tour guide there and learning about the Bidwell story right there on site at the Bidwell Mansion. So I'm going to turn this over to Sondra Murphy.
Got it.
Maybe down here.
Okay, I'm really loud, so don't put it too close there. I should mention that Magliari and Gillis then wrote a book that we called the Bible, the Bidwell Bible, when we were working over there. This was the one we all had to read, and then they had all kinds of other supplementals that we could read, and using the staff library was the way we could kind of develop our themes. So thank you all for coming out. It's really great to see live humans again and a lot of familiar faces. I appreciate that. Again, my name is Sondra Murphy. Murphy at the Mansion is what I went by, just Murphy, not Murphy at the Mansion. And I worked there from 2013 to 24. I was laid off last spring for the renovation efforts. I was hoping to maybe be rehired when they finished it, and we all know how that turned out. So my plan was always to haunt the mansion when I died. So I don't know if they'll have any little area that I can creep into. Maybe I'll help them find some things they're looking for down in the basement eventually. I began researching this theme in 2015, and it has evolved from a physical tour. We walked through with all these plaques and cards and stuff into the different rooms, and it's evolved into this electronic offering I'm bringing to you today. I am not a Bidwell or women's suffrage expert. I am a student of both, and I will enjoy sharing some of my findings with interested live humans again. Thank you to Dave Nopel for inviting me to the Chico History Museum Spring Lecture Season, and to Nancy Leek for her recommendation. All right, and I'm a little rusty on all this, so hopefully I won't push all the wrong buttons. So much of the following content is inspired by the book Women Win the Vote by Betsy Covington Smith. It was part of the Mansion staff library. It provides a kind of one-stop basis for the following timeline. Since perusing the history of women's suffrage books, we had 6 volumes housed in the library, 4 of which were given to Annie by Susan B. Anthony. And it appears that Smith's book was kind of a Cliff's Notes version of that aforementioned set. I used both sources to inform further research, especially when seeking some of the quotes and images I'll be presenting. So John and Annie Bidwell were each supporters of women's suffrage, and the mansion hosted leaders of the movement. So when John Bidwell begins efforts towards building the Bidwell Mansion around 1860, his intention is to create a welcoming place for people to relax during their travels. Little does he know that his guest list will vastly increase when he marries the daughter of the Washington, D.C. Census Superintendent, someone named Annie Kennedy. Kennedy is an educated society lady who has converted to Presbyterianism in her teens. Like many of her fellow Presbyterians, Kennedy believes in matching her actions to her convictions of generosity, hospitality, social justice, and reform while proclaiming the gospel of Christ. This leads her to become involved in the temperance movement, which in turn leads her to supporting the controversial efforts of women winning the vote in this nation. And this photo here is what Annie would have looked like around the time she met John at the age of 26. This photo here is about what John would have looked like when he met Annie. At first glance, the union between John Bidwell and Annie Kennedy is an unlikely merger. The son of humble farmers, John is 20 years older, explores the Midwest as a young adult, emigrates to California at 21, strikes gold, and starts a successful ranch by the time he is 30. His numerous diary entries reveal an open-minded, intelligent person who is able to get along with the majority of the people he interacts with. The Kennedy family is well connected and educates its sons and daughters with as much equity as the times will allow. They appear to encourage their children to think for themselves and expect them to express their opinions with decorum. When pioneer turned politician Bidwell is invited to a gathering at the Kennedy household, he is charmed by the daring ideals voiced by both Kennedy sisters and is particularly smitten with Annie. This photo, Annie is in the dark jacket, her sister Sally is seated, and one of the Reynolds cousins, I forget her first name, there are so many of them, is the one in the back. Annie, a thoroughly modern woman, wants to be a missionary. She is also close to her East Coast family. Bidwell's first marriage proposal is gracefully rejected and friendship substituted. Over the next 2 years, Bidwell strives to become the man worthy of Annie's love in order to convince her to wed him. In 1868, Bidwell brings his new bride to Chico, and the couple move into the nearly completed mansion together. Their partnership is trend-setting. John Bidwell supports his wife's efforts for temperance and suffrage, both philosophically and financially. Sorry, I lost my place. Annie will continue to travel to conventions for the rest of her life, while John's platforms will subsequently include both issues. And Annie finds common ground with the leaders of both movements. Some of these leaders will ultimately find brief respite in Chico from their busy seeking engagements, most prominently Susan B. Anthony, founder and president of the National Women's Suffrage Association. Annie also meets Frances Willard, the president of the National Women's Christian Temperance Union. We will now meet some of those people whose words Annie heard and read. And if you're wondering, this photo is from 1889 in California, or Colorado. It looks a lot like the early normal school, but it is not. That's what I was thinking it was. So certainly, individual families, communities, and religious organizations brought unique perspectives to the notions of equality. but it was the colonization of the Americas that fed our ideals, nurturing them, and they were also nurtured by religious freedom until women felt secure in voicing our visions. More than 300 years ago, American colonist women began working alongside men in harsh conditions, showing by example that gender was not the basis of survival success. This was not a new idea, but with new ideals gleaned from the struggles to abolish slavery, the 19th century is rife with opportunities for women's rights. This comes about through a convergence of philosophies from different aspects of society. By assisting with abolition efforts, being trained as teachers, working in factories, witnessing legal inequities, and wishing to end the neglect and abuse perpetrated by drunkard heads of households. Women gradually come to the realization that in order to truly bring about the changes we see as necessary, we need to be able to vote. And the 19th century is when women first organized together to win that right. Female abolitionists are common in the decades preceding the U.S. Civil War. Some, like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Coffin Mott, marry abolitionists and participate in the movement alongside husbands. Others, like Sarah and Angelina Grimke here, begin writing and speaking to the evils of slavery they have witnessed. The Grimkes are sisters from a South Carolina slave-owning family who are largely received with rave reviews by audiences. They are shocked and angered, therefore, when others begin to criticize them over the perceived indecency of women speaking in public. The Grimkes respond by comparing the restrictions of slavery to the low position of women in society. And it's not long before audience members also begin to consider the injustices in their own lives. When Stanton and Mott are barred, with all women delegates, from participating in the 1840 World Anti-Slavery Convention in London, it sets off a chain of events that initiate the women's movement. Mott and Stanton begin talking in the gallery and start a correspondence that culminates in the first Women's Rights Convention in Seneca Falls, New York on July 19th and 20th, 1848. During that convention, Resolution 9, a woman's right to vote, it wins by a small margin. This is a women's rights convention and it wins by a small margin. The Declaration of Sentiments is penned by Stanton and signed by 68 women and 32 men, including young Charlotte Woodward, the only woman present at this convention who will live long enough to see the passage of the 19th Amendment. I know. Meanwhile, under the leadership of women like Sarah Bagley, mill workers are busy trying to bridge the discrepancy between men and women's wages. About 250,000 women are working in manufacturing in 1850, and they're also trying to include factory conditions. And if you look at that photo, it's kind of strong to even call those women. Those are truly mill girls if you look at how young they are. In 1850, the first National Women's Rights Convention is held in Worcester, Massachusetts. It draws thousands of people from 11 states while bringing together the emerging leaders of the movement. Stanton, a philosopher with respected intellect, Lucy Stone, a popular and inspirational orator, and Anthony, whose organizational skills have given focus to the cause. Anthony has worked tirelessly in the abolition cause, collecting 400,000 signatures and $3,000 toward anti-slavery efforts. When the Civil War ends and the slaves freed, Anthony and others expect abolitionists to assist with women's suffrage. Instead, the abolition leaders ask them to wait until true suffrage for black men is won. Anthony ceases all of her abolition efforts at this point, while others like Lucy Stone choose to see it through before dedicating all of her energies to women's issues. So begins the first of many splits among workers in the women's movement. Anthony's National Women's Suffrage Association competing with Stone's American Women's Association. The end of the war also brings home soldiers with physical and psychological injuries and few remedies to counter the pain. Alcoholism runs rampant, saloons and breweries and distilleries boom, while few laws protect the women and children living in such households. To make matters worse, a husband or father by law owns the household wages. Women working to pay for food, heat, or shelter for their neglected families are regularly forced to turn it over just to see it squandered on spirits. Many would also get a beating for their objections. The temperance movement is really born of these injustices. So under the leadership of Frances Willard, the Women's Christian Temperance Union gains momentum and embraces the idea that voting women could change laws. Her home protection ballot leads large numbers of middle-class women into the movement for the first time. So we had a lot of upper-class people and a lot of working-class people, and suddenly the middle class are starting to care about it. As the leaders of the women's movement age and pass away, new generation of energetic women begin to emerge in the movement, inspired by British activism methods and fueled by political cynicism. People like Alice Paul and Lucy Burns, pictured here, will lead the charge of resistance and spend time behind bars for voicing their ideals in the most intrusive manner possible. In this case, standing silently with signs. How dare they, right? Being indecent and all that. Reports of their mistreatment and forced feedings in jail will help turn the final tide in favor of women's suffrage. So equal rights efforts will continue to overlap among the issues of gender and race relations, with women being some of the most distinctive voices calling for change throughout the 20th century and now into the 21st. And this map, the blue states, women had full voting rights before the 19th Amendment. The gray states had, women had full voting rights before the 19th Amendment and before their own statehood. The green states, women could vote for president and some other things like school board and things like that before the 19th Amendment. And those orange states only gained voting rights for women with the passage of the 19th Amendment. So there's no question that Annie Kennedy Bidwell dislikes it when people overindulge in alcohol consumption. John Bidwell seems more inclined to keep his opinions on the behaviors of others to himself, unless he is campaigning, when he enjoys the opportunity to present his perspective on temperance and suffrage. He runs for President of the United States in 1892 as the Prohibition Party candidate. Annie's enthusiasm and efforts in the WCTU is documented in many ways after her marriage. When Frances Willard comes to the conclusion that voting women could guarantee laws restricting alcohol distribution and production, it is likely that Annie embraced the idea with her usual zeal. Diary entries notate monetary contributions and travels to various conventions and presentations. Annie frequently hosts temperance and suffrage meetings in her home, with the additional good fortune of a husband who supports those same issues. The Bidwell Mansion will serve as a comfortable and modern stop for many of Annie's friends and acquaintances working for women's rights. So, on Monday, July 17th, 1905, Susan B. Anthony is the main speaker during the Bidwell Park dedication, during which, among other things, she had this to say: "How can you men, with a proper sense of justice, say and manifest that Mrs. Bidwell, to whom you now give your gratitude and who has given you such a great gift, is beneath you, not your equal. Yet you do say she is not your equal when you refuse her the right that you possess to vote at the polls for the uplifting of society and the governing of the park which she has given you. And that was when the Chico Daily Enterprise was all one thing in 1905. It was Anthony who gave Annie Bidwell her first copies of A History of Women's Suffrage. Annie would later buy copies of the text to donate to local libraries. Our records are spotty as to when Annie first met Anthony. It's possibly in 1896 when Annie attended a meeting of suffrage leaders in San Francisco. And others included people like Ida Husted Harper, Anna Shaw, Katie Chapman Catt, and Ellen Clark Sargent, all who had pieces in those volumes. The photos of the History of Women's Suffrage volumes that you'll see here were housed in the Mansion Library and opportunistically photographed by yours truly. I was a big pest about it, in fact, because we weren't allowed to touch any of those books, and I was told they were going to be pulling them out to clean, and I went over there with my phone and was like, please, and so they set those up. I wasn't allowed to touch those. Set those up. I was allowed to look through the table of contents, and it had photos, and it's like, I could spend a couple days looking at these. And they're like, no, you can't. So I thankfully got these photos because that's all that's left of them now. So in the first volume, Anthony inscribes, Mrs. Annie K. Bidwell, Chico, California. See what noble women spoke for equal rights to women before you were born. Yes, even before I was born. Indeed, the love for liberty was born in women as in man. Sincerely and affectionately yours, Susan B. Anthony, Rochester, New York, August 20th, 1905. I was always so happy to report that she had dated those to the tours over there. It's like she had the foresight to date those for us. That was really nice. And in case you want to see that more legibly, I transcribed that there. The second and third volumes, she was a little more brief. The second volume says, with love and faith, and the third says, with love and admiration of your devoted friend. But by the fourth volume, she gets a little political. Miss Annie K. Bidwell, Chico, California. President Roosevelt has pleaded with Russia and Japan for the sake of justice and civilization to return to peace. Now he must, for the sake of justice to women, and place his administration above all others, plead with his own Congress to submit to the legislatures of the several states an amendment to the federal Constitution forbidding disenfranchisement on account of sex in all the states, territories of the Union. Would not so doing round out his noble work for civilization? Yours for equal justice, Susan B. Anthony, Rochester, New York, August 20th, 1905. A longtime docent, Gretchen Vanderwall, I took these photos and I printed them out, and we were peering over these words for days trying to figure out everything they said. We probably got it all right, but I'm not sure. And there is a more legible version of those three. Any clarification questions thus far? Anything I mumbled or mistyped? Okay. All right, so Annie met some of her contemporaries. I love the headgear in this shot, by the way. Others she corresponded with. Many more were familiar through their writings in the women's suffrage books and other publications that ran their words. So she would have read these a lot, and so I get to share a little bit of some of those being included. It becomes apparent during my research that a common factor is shared by the following women, and that is that they had families who valued educating all of their children regardless of gender. And it was particularly fortunate in that era to have a father who valued a daughter's intelligence, because that wasn't always the case. We've got good old Anne Hutchinson. The women writing this went back really far because they wanted to really show how hard people have been working for a while. I conceive there lies a rule in Titus that the elder woman should instruct the younger, and then I must have a time wherein I must do it. Margaret Brent was the first American woman to request the right to vote in 1648. On January 21st, she appeared before the Maryland Assembly to demand 2 votes, one for herself as a landowner and one for Lord Baltimore as his legal representative. The governor refused, and according to court records, she protested against all proceedings unless she may be present and have a vote as aforesaid. Abigail Adams. So Abigail Smith was born in 1744. Her mother's relatives included the powerful Quincy family. She was scholarly, well-read, and a perfect match for the intellectual John Adams, who she married in 1864. Her March 31st, 1776, Remember the Ladies letter, is asking the founding fathers to really do just divorce and property ownership, which was non-existent for women. This was one piece of his wife's advice that John Adams didn't follow. I long to hear that you have declared an independency. And by the way, in the new code of laws, which I suppose it will be necessary for you to make, I desire you would remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Do not put such unlimited power into the hands of husbands. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation. Judith Sargent Murray was a member of a wealthy ship-owning merchant family, and her parents were able to provide her siblings and her with a top-notch education. However, there were few opportunities for her to receive any formal education beyond reading and writing. She believed that with quality education, women's accomplishments could equal those of men's, and women could succeed in life if parents educated their daughters to reverence themselves, as she put it in one of her essays. Will it be said that the judgment of a male of 2 years old is more sage than that of females of the same age? But from that period, what partiality? How is the one exalted and the other depressed by the contrary modes of education which are adopted? The one is taught to aspire, and the other is early confined and limited. As their years increase, the sister must be wholly domesticated, while the brother is led by the hand through all the flowery paths of science. Emma Hart Willard, one of 17 children, her farmer father encouraged his children to read and think for themselves. She enrolls in a school at age 15, and in a couple years she's teaching there. She's taking charge of that academy and another, and eventually, after managing these, she is inspired to write a plan for improving female education, and that was a basis for a lot of efforts at that point. This work advocated educating young women similarly to young men throughout academy level. She then opened a female seminary, later renamed the Emma Willard School in 1895. The education of females has been exclusively directed to fit them for displaying to advantage the charms of youth and beauty. Though well to decorate the blossom, it is far better to prepare for the harvest. They had a way, right? Maria W. Stewart was the first American woman to speak to a racially mixed audience of men and women. Stewart was also the first African American woman to make public lectures about women's rights and make a public anti-slavery speech. This led to publication opportunities and a lot of more speaking engagements. And she was very succinct. Talk without effort is nothing. The Grimke sisters, we abolition women are turning the world upside down, Angelina claims. Good old Lucy Stone Blackwell, remember that name, it's going to show up a few more times in this lecture. Now all we need is to continue to speak the truth fearlessly, and we shall add to our number those who will turn the scale to the side of equal and full justice in all things. Sarah Bagley. Now, she was born on a farm in New Hampshire, and after her family fell on hard times in 1835, she moves to Lowell, Massachusetts to work as a mill girl in the Hamilton Mills. She was 28, older than most of the girls as we saw in that picture, and she leads them in a petition drive for safer working conditions and shorter hours. She wrote and spoke for the cause with power. Typical of her rhetoric was this: whenever I raise the point that it is immoral to shut us up in a room 12 hours a day in the most monotonous and tedious employment, I am told that we have come to the mills voluntarily and we can leave when we will. Voluntarily, the whip which brings us to Lowell is necessity. We must have money. A father's debts are to be paid, an aged mother to be supported, a brother's ambition to be aided, and so the factories are supplied. Is this an act of free will? Is this freedom? To my mind, it is slavery. So again, making that connection. Elizabeth Cady Stanton. So she was an educated daughter of a New York judge, and she witnessed that married women have no property or child custody rights. She marries an abolitionist, and as a young wife often feels trapped by domesticity, especially when the family moves to Seneca Falls and her husband travels without her, leaving her home with the kids. In 1848, Mott and Stanton and 3 other women spend a day together. A torrent of discontent, as she put it, is expressed by Stanton, and it leads to a discussion, whereas all 5 decide a large meeting is needed to discuss women's rights. She goes home and writes the Women's Declaration of Independence, later renamed the Declaration of Sentiments. She basically takes the Declaration of Independence, and wherever you see man, she adds, and woman, like we're here too, you know. And then she had some other demands. The women's right to own property, control her own earnings, share child custody, gain an education, enter a profession. Ooh, radical, you know. So we take those for granted, but these were things denied us for so long. She gradually comes to the realization if women could vote, they can change the laws that would be required to do so. And she says, and I think this says a bit of her marriage as well, the history of mankind is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations on the part of man toward woman, having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over her. Lucretia Coffin Mott was a Quaker from Nantucket Island, Massachusetts, raised in a tradition of equality, teaches school, marries an abolitionist, and joins her husband in anti-slavery causes. If our principles are right, why should we be cowards? So besides speaking and writing about women's rights, others like Elizabeth Blackwell were leading by example. If society will not admit of women's free development, then society must be remodeled. Instead of speeches and editorials, some women were making revolutionary statements through fictional characters, such as Catherine Sedgwick here, who wrote, "Marriage is not essential to the contentment, dignity, or the happiness of woman." That's from Hope Leslie, Early Times in Massachusetts. I find these authors, if you think of Maggie Smith as saying these quotes, it works really well. Harriet Beecher Stowe, "Never give up, for that is just the place and time that the tide will turn." That is from Old Town Folks. And my favorite, Fanny Fern, "Oh, girls, set your affection on cats, poodles, parrots, or lapdogs, but let matrimony alone. It's the hardest way on earth to getting a living." From Fern Leaves. We think of that as being very prompt and prim and stuff, but you know, people could say stuff. Sojourner Truth, a national treasure. "If women want any rights more than they's got, why don't they just take them and not be talking about it?" Amelia Bloomer, the short-lived fashion Bloomer advocated, allowed more efficient movement for women canvassing for abolition up steps or moving in and out of carriages. She's wearing them there. They're basically a riding skirt, kind of, you know. It will not do to say that it is out of women's sphere to assist in making laws, for if that were so, then it should also be out of her sphere to submit to them. So, like what Abigail Adams was saying, too. Antoinette Brown Blackwell, there's that name again. She was the first female ordained minister in the United States, among other things. The sexes in each species of being are always true equivalents, equals but not identical. And I really like that one a lot. Ida Husted Harper, one of many people in those books. Men have two ways of righting their wrongs, by force and by the ballot. Both are denied to women, one by nature, the other by man. And I think today we can say that that is not the case anymore, and I really appreciate all the work they did for us, you know. Matilda Joslyn Gage, among other things, one of the writers in that book. There is a word sweeter than mother, home, or heaven. That word is liberty. All right, Anna Shaw. We do not have enough time to talk about how awesome Anna Shaw was. Do yourself a favor if you don't know her, look her up. Her resume is going to have to speak for herself. Methodist minister, medical doctor, prohibitionist, suffragist, abolitionist. She was a president of the National American Women's Suffrage Association. They merged back, you know, they split and they came back for a long time as well. And she had this to say: think of submitting our measure to the advice of politicians. I would as soon submit the subject of equality of a goose to a fox. Carrie Chapman Catt, founder of the League of Women Voters, among other things. To the wrongs that need resistance, to the right that needs assistance, to the future in the distance, give yourselves. I can hear that being kind of hollered over a crowd. Lucy Webb Ware Hayes, Methodist, abolitionist, prohibitionist, First Lady from 1877 to 81, and a Bidwell Mansion guest in 1881 as well. She was the daughter of a doctor, and her mother freed the family slaves when that doctor died. She was like, you're gone. Then she moved the family to Ohio, where Lucy enrolled at Wesleyan Women's College. She was a member of the class of 1850. She graduates with honors and marries Rutherford B. Hayes in 1852. While her husband served with Union forces during the American Civil War, she works in hospitals and camps. She is the first wife of a U.S. president to have graduated from college. She would later be referred to as Lemonade Lucy, due to supporting her husband's ban on alcoholic beverages in the White House during the Hayes administration. Woman's mind is as strong as man, equal in all things and is superior in some. Frances Willard. So to Willard, the goal of the home protection movement is to allow women to fulfill the potential, not as she put it, the encumbrance and toy of man, but as companions and counselors of men. Annie's Tuesday, November 3rd, 1890 diary entry includes General, oh, that's what she called John, General. General read to me from Miss Frances E. Willard's Glimpses of 50 Years. Thinks Miss Willard as gifted in language as H.W. Beecher and most remarkable for everything. This seems to be the law of progress in everything we do. It moves along a spiral rather than a perpendicular. We seem to be actually going out of our way, and yet it turns out we're really moving upward all the time. Yeah, I could see how that would really inspire people. Good old Susan B. Anthony, men their rights and nothing more, women their rights and nothing less. Clara Barton, another leading by example, founder of the American Red Cross. The patriot blood of my father was warm in my veins. Ida B. Wells, again, somebody we just don't have the time to do justice to. She was actually born a slave just prior to Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, and at 16, when her parents died of yellow fever, she becomes a teacher to support her remaining surviving siblings. So she was struck by pay discrepancy between whites and blacks in Mississippi, so she moves to Tennessee for better wages, and she's attending Fisk University during summer breaks. So in 1884, she refused to give up her seat on a train, resulting in being dragged from the car. She filed a lawsuit, eventually won, but the verdict was later overturned by the Tennessee Supreme Court. But that notoriety brought writing and editorial opportunities. When friends were lynched in Memphis, she began researching, investigating, and writing candidly about those lynchings and lynchings in general. And then after marrying, she writes A Divided Duty regarding trying to balance family and work demands, so something we can all relate to. It is interesting to note the groundwork made by Wells that would be influential during the civil rights and women's rights movements of the 1960s and 70s. They had made me an exile and threatened my life for hinting at the truth. Emmeline Pankhurst and other British suffragettes would inspire the second wave of U.S. suffragists, the ones that, were cynical and all that, to employ political activism tactics in their efforts. If it is right for men to fight for their freedom, and God knows what the human race would be like today if men had not, since time began, fought for their freedom, then it is right for women to fight for their freedom and the freedom of the children they bear. Alice Paul, among other things, one of the silent sentinels and spent time in jail. There will never be a new world order until women are part of it. Lucy Burns, another convict, we shall call her. It is unthinkable that a national government which represents women should ignore the issue of the right of all women to political freedom. Jeanette Rankin, first U.S. Congresswoman, and this quote is often paraphrased even today. I may be the first woman member of Congress, but I won't be the last. Margaret Sanger, a free race cannot be born of slave mother. So there's that connection again. Mother Jones, I pray for the dead and fight like hell for the living. And what was young Charlotte Woodward, the only woman who signed the Declaration of Sentiments in the 1848 Women's Rights Convention in Seneca Falls, who lived long enough to see women allowed to vote in a national election. However, age and failing eyesight prevented Woodward from getting to the polls. I know. My heart is with all women who vote. They have gained it now, and they should not quarrel about the method of using it. We need to hear that more today, I think. And Annie Ellicott Kennedy Bidwell. So after meeting future husband John Bidwell, Annie would relocate to California and spent the bulk of her life on the West Coast. However, she continued to work and travel for suffrage and prohibition causes, joining the Women's Christian Temperance Union and supporting its efforts both financially and through board membership. She also supported many efforts toward gaining the vote for women. In California, Bidwell would also become interested in the struggles of Native Americans, and she worked towards the equity and survival of indigenous peoples. An amateur botanist, Annie collected the first known specimen of a small annual plant, which is then named Bidwell's knotweed. If you don't know what that is, look it up, and you're like, yeah, I've seen that all over the park. So that was named after her. In addition to her causes, Bidwell would become well known for her generosity, hospitality, and preservation of the natural habitat she and her husband so loved. Bidwell land donations resulted in the city of Chico, California State University, Chico, Bidwell Park, Chico Cemetery, Chico Presbyterian Church, Bidwell Sacramento State Park, and Bidwell Mansion State Historic Park. She was pen pals with John Muir for all of his life, so you can kind of see his impact on her too there. She lived until 1918, so long enough to see California women win full voting rights on October 10th, 1911. The busy hands, brain, feet, and heart have ceased their work for God and humanity, have fought a good fight, and translated, Spirit wears the victor's crown with the redeemed. The world is poor, but being dead, she yet speaketh. And that was a diary entry that she put in when she found out that her friend, Miss Anthony, had passed away. Now, as much as all these women were influential and important, we got to talk about the dudes, because without men, the vote never would have happened. And there were lots of men like John Bidwell who were very brave and secure in their own masculinity, openly supporting women's suffrage efforts. John Augustus Sargent, he was a California Republican that served in the 37th, 41st, and 42nd Congress. He is the author of the 19th Amendment, 1878, 42 years before it passed. It sat in committee for 8 or 9 years, and then was voted down over and over and over until its passage. And it basically reads, the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on the account of sex. Congress shall have power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. Again, really radical, right? We think of that as just a thing now. Leland Stanford, famous for so many things. The rights of one sex, political and otherwise, are the same as those of the other sex, and this equality of rights ought to be fully recognized. Oh, another national treasure, Frederick Douglass. We don't have time to talk about him. Most of us heard about him, but it's a really good biography or two to read, especially his own autobiography, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave. So he is the only African American to attend that 1848 Women's Convention. So that was interesting, and he gave a lot of encouragement to women when they were kind of feeling down. He was always kind of lifting them up, which is cool. In this denial of the right to participate in government, not merely the degradation of woman and the perpetuation of great injustice happens, but the maiming and repudiation of one half of the moral and intellectual power of the government of the world. Whew, yeah, you steal my heart right there. So we got some supportive husbands. I couldn't find any good quotes, but I found some interesting facts. So Mott chaired the first Women's Rights Convention in 1848 and was a signer of the Declaration of Sentiments. His 5 surviving children worked in reform movements, including anti-slavery. 3 of Blackwell's daughters were physicians, the other an artist. We all need those. Another Blackwell bro right here. Blackwell proposed as part of his marriage ceremony to Lucy Stone that he would renounce all the privileges which the law confers upon me, which are not strictly mutual, and pledge myself to never avail myself of them under any circumstances. I know, very enlightened, I told you. Every point gained is a step forward. Thomas Woodrow Wilson, politician, academic, 28th President of the United States, women's suffrage supporter eventually. He took a lot of twisting. I always imagine, like a lot of people in this nation, a lot of interesting conversations around the dinner table with your teen and grown daughters about just who is qualified to vote and who isn't, right? If you want to make enemies, try to change something. Robert La Follette, he was a big supporter as well as a senator. Co-suffrage, like co-education, will react not to the special advantage of either men or women, but will result in a more enlightened, better balanced citizenship and in a truer democracy. W.B. Du Bois, co-founder of the NAACP and editor of its journal, The Crisis, in which he wrote many essays in support of women's suffrage. The cost of liberty is less than the price of repression. Max Eastman, who was a founding member of the Men's League for Women's Suffrage. When we saw that picture of all the dudes marching, he was one of those guys. The worst enemy of human hope is not brute facts, but men with brains who will not face them. I know, it's like we would like to bring them all back to life today sometimes. Another American treasure, Mark Twain. To win freedom always involves hard fighting. I believe in women doing what they deem necessary to secure their rights. Another man with daughters, you know, right there. David Starr Jordan, very, very busy man, most notably founding president of Stanford University. Wisdom is knowing what to do next, skill is knowing how to do it, and virtue is doing it. Stephen S. Wise, another member of the Men's League for Women's Suffrage. Vision looks inward and becomes duty. Vision looks outward and becomes aspiration. Vision looks upward and becomes faith. I know. Anyway. And finally, John Bidwell. He's an open-minded and self-educated son of farmers. He travels from his New York birthplace to California as his pioneer yearnings dictate. As a California congressman, he meets and later weds Annie Kennedy in Washington in 1868. Their union will reinforce Bidwell's tendency to support fairness and equity. His Chico mansion hosts scores of meetings and travelers, including leaders of the temperance and suffrage movements. I love this one. In the name of right and humanity, then, let not free, enlightened, and Christian America longer injure and degrade women by withholding from her that which is her inalienable right, that which will elevate American womanhood, that which will enlarge her usefulness, that which will impart to her greater ability to be the helper and co-worker with men under all circumstances and conditions, that which alone will make woman man's equal before the law and place in her hands the most efficient weapon with which to defend her rights and protect her home. I allude, of course, to that priceless heritage, the ballot. And that is from his letter accepting the Prohibition Party presidential candidacy. So that one always brings me to tears right there. So finally, just some ratification notes there. All the ones on your left were the ones that it took to get it to the states, or get it ratified once it was passed by Congress. And then Connecticut, it was just a scheduling issue. The late bloomers always interest me. 1921 Vermont, that was probably a scheduling issue. 1923 Delaware, 1941 Maryland, 1952 Virginia, 1953 Alabama, 1969 Florida and South Carolina, 1970 Georgia and Louisiana, 1971 North Carolina, 1984 Mississippi. What the heck? In conclusion, fresh expectations of feminine brain and brawn subtly transform civilization, because humanity will ever be impacted by the actions of women, be they grand and noble rousings voiced over crowds, or the more familiar daily displays of selfless example. And Annie is the top left, the little one there. Notice their headgear's improved by this time. Late 19th or early 20th century. So many people who are working to try and get the right that we take for granted. That is the end of my presentation. Are there any questions about anything at all that I've said, misspoke, typoed? Yes, ma'am.
How can I get a copy of this?
I don't know.
I want to go back and look into all those people you suggested. You probably
So if you come to me and give me some contact information, I can at least give you a list of people to research. And I don't know how I can get you this PowerPoint. So here's the deal. This laptop, I've had to get PowerPoint and try and do all this because I had a lot of this worked out at the mansion, and I've had some technical difficulties, and I was just like, just give me the 26, just give me the 26. So I can work on trying to get you a copy somehow. But yes.
I just heard it was recorded.
Oh, it's recorded. Never mind. Hey, I forgot. It's recorded. Talk to the museum. Yes, sir.
You can take text like this and through Amazon produce a book.
Oh, yeah, that's what I can do.
And it's not very expensive, $10 to $15.
Okay. That's information for me. I'll put that on my list. Put that on my to-do list in the back, yes.
Did any of the gentlemen and husbands who were supported, were any of them spend time in jail or persecuted against for saying I'm standing for my witnesses?
None that I know of, because none of them would be caught out there in front of that White House. So at the time, so I remember the split between National and American Women's Suffrage Association. What happened was the First World War came, and there was a lot of debate about whether we should be, oh, don't worry about this voting thing, we have to support the war. And the National Women's Suffrage Association went, no, we're still going to work for this. And the American was like, we're going to show our patriotism. And then that sort of, once they merged again, that paid off, and that's what let Wilson kind of change his mind about things, was because they're like, no, see, we've done all this stuff to support the war. Look at all this stuff we've done. So and there were lots of state efforts, so they're trying to get voting rights for women state by state, so that's why that map that showed the different versions. So I don't know of any man who went to jail for that, but I might be lacking in my research. So homework for me, thank you. Yes.
So you stated that the women that went to jail, there was force feeding?
Oh yeah. So they did a hunger strike. So they would do that thing. I have pictures. It's really gross, but basically they would they would tie them up, put a funnel, and they would feed them this weird milk thing to keep them alive. And you can imagine what like prison milk might be like, and how long it might have been stored before refrigeration and such. So there are a lot of complaints about things that might have been living in the milk as well. So yeah, it was really gross. They did that in Europe, especially in Britain as well. And it was typical of any inmate who was doing any kind of hunger strike, but the women were just adamant about it, and they would just tie them up and do it. So those reports were sneaked out, and people wrote about them in the papers, and that's what started people arguing around that dinner table about, all they're doing is trying to get this. Why would you treat them like that? They would also put them in notorious places where violent offenders and lots of prostitutes were being housed, and just to kind of try to humiliate them a little, and it didn't really work. So, thankfully. Yes?
I think you said it, but I couldn't hear. Those volumes that were given to Annie, did those survive the fire?
Unless any of you have found any pieces in your yard somewhere, I'm told that the library pages scattered. No, that was my first question when I talked to the curator. What happened to the books? Did the books make it? Besides that, there are many baskets that the Machupta had given Annie. Thankfully, many of them were put in the visitor center on display, and those survived, but there were still a handful of really cool ones. And she was just about to loan them to the Machupta tribe for something they were working on too. And I know, it's really, every once in a while I just kind of wake up in bed and think of something. Oh no, what about this? Oh, in the back, yes.
I'm curious in your research if you thought that Annie was more concerned with getting the vote for temperance issues, or was she more wanting the vote just because, men and women are equal?
I think she started because of temperance, but as she got involved, and I think you saw what John said, I think it started being like, a lot of the complaints at the time were that felons eventually could vote, people who were insane men who were insane could vote. There were a lot of different people who could vote, but a perfectly educated woman wasn't allowed to vote. So that was a lot of the argument. So I think that she definitely came over to wanting that as just a God-given right, basically. So I know she definitely started because of the temperance thing, and that's a whole. That's a whole other thing I could do about her family dynamics and her Irish family and some of the alcoholism involved. That was the chip on her shoulder that started all this, but she evolved and grew, and it became a part of just the right thing to do. Yes?
In the letters between John and Annie before marriage,
Yes.
do I understand that she put him to the test? He had to agree to certain things?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Okay, so I have that one. You will see all of the notes that I have. And then there's also, I have the other one too. Oh, Dear General. That's some of the most interesting of their love letters. He was kind of, okay, he was raised somewhat religious. I truly believe, so this is a lot of interpretation on my part, that she reminded him of his mother a little, and how he was raised, who he never saw again once he came out here. And she kind of reawakened this thought of being a better Christian. And she was raised Episcopalian, but she became in her teens Presbyterian, and a lot of time in teens you become kind of militant about it, so she was very militant about it. And they were really on the push for the temperance thing. And she had a lot of arguments with her own father about because temperance at the time meant no heavy stuff, no beer and no heavy stuff. Wine was fine, And her father was like, Annie, wine's even in the Bible, She never gave her parents trouble because that would be disobedient, but she certainly gave John trouble. He was already working towards temperance when he met her. He was kind of leaning that way because he had grapevines. He made wine, and he saw the issues with some of his workers imbibing a little too much and then not showing up to do work. So he was kind of leaning that way, and she just kind of sealed the deal, I think. And then she had a lot of requests, like she had to be able to go back to Washington anytime she wanted, at least once a year. She needed him to build a Presbyterian church for her, because there was not one here. So of course the first two burned down, and finally they went, hey, let's make it in brick next to the creek, that might help. So that's the one that still survives. I don't know where I am. So it's there. It's over that. Oh, it's that way. Sorry. No sense of direction. Sorry. It's that way. I keep pointing. Sorry. I keep pointing to the plaza. Sorry. So yeah, he had a lot of stuff, but I don't have them committed to memory. Dear General talks a little bit about him. I don't have a lot of tabs in that one, though.
Did she require him to pull out the grapes?
She did require him to pull out the grapes. It took several years to slowly do. He replaced them with table grapes and made raisins, basically.
And his grapes were made into brandy.
Yeah, well, you know. Yeah, okay. See, more information for me. Yeah, I probably forgot that. I was kind of like, pulled out all the grapes. Yeah, I remember growing up here along the creek. Where am I? Along the creek. Some of the residual grapes were still there, especially on campus, and they've been cleared out since then. A lot, as a lot of the non-indigenous species got removed because they were causing trouble. So, yes.
So I just want to clarify those 3 gorgeous textbooks, suffragist textbooks, signed by Susan B. Effie. They were lost in the fire. You were not allowed to take pictures of every page, or they were lost.
Sadly, they were lost. So I'm very fortunate that I was pushy, I can't say fortunate, about getting those photos. I was finally, they had it out, because you couldn't just go, hey, go over and do that. So I was able to just briefly look through it. Now I've been looking online, you can get like one of those old versions, and with inscriptions by Anthony to other folks. They're like, $1,000 to $5,000 depending on the condition. And so I'm trying to find just like a reprint somewhere, but I don't just want a stinky little paperback, so I've been kind of picky about what I get. So eventually I'm going to at least get the first volume and look through it more precisely. I remember they had different illustrations of certain women, similar like to some of the line drawings. No photos that I can recall, but I didn't get a chance to look through it all. She had all 6 volumes. The last 2 volumes were created after Anthony's death, so they came later, but those 4 that she had inscribed were the jewel. We also had some Frances Willard books. We had books given to them by John Muir with his inscription in there. We had a lot, to my wonderful wife from her loving husband John, that kind of stuff that were lost as well. So, and in fact, the Frances Willard books had his inscription because they were a gift to her. So I was able to look through, and I do have some pictures of that inscription with the Frances Willard somewhere. I'm trying to find which phone I took it in, because, I didn't always download it on anything except at work. So anyway, that's gone now. Once I was gone, they just got rid of all my stuff, so. Yes.
So there were no children,
No. Oh, yes. I'm sorry.
and then any adoptions of any children taken in?
Did not. So she did consider adopting. Their house was around before a hospital was. So when people were injured or ill, sometimes they took people in. They ended up with a little orphan girl that she considered adopting, but her mother said, "Oh, no, bad idea." She had nephews and a niece that she was very loving to, that participated in their upbringing and schooling. In fact, her only niece, so her, her brother John, that's why she called John Bidwell the general, because it was confusing. He moved here, he had 2 sons. The youngest son, Joey, very wisely named his only daughter Annie Ellicott Kennedy, and she inherited all the girl things from Annie because she had only nephews otherwise. So the reason that we had Annie's piano in the mansion, is because she moved to LA and she donated it to the city, and the city gave it back to the mansion when it started being renovated, because they were moving it around and there were a few cracks in it, and they're like, yeah, we're gonna kill this. I think a lot of the donations that came in, people had something really lovely and they were afraid if they kept it too long it would get ruined, either in storage or by use. So I think the piano was one of those things as well. There was a hand in the back, yes?
Is that photo taken in the mansion?
That photo is not taken in the mansion. I think it's somewhere in the Bay Area, but I'm not positive. It's sometimes hard to get the locations because the people posting them don't always know. And I had to try to find things that I was allowed to take. So the ones that you knew for sure you couldn't use. So I had to be careful about that. Yes?
Okay, the name Kennedy,
Yes.
in relation to the Kennedys?
Different branch.
Okay.
We haven't found the common grandfather to unite them all. Her family came over before the potato famine, and the Massachusetts Kennedys came afterwards. Her brother was John. I always say, yeah, John Kennedy slept in the mansion in 1860 instead of 1960, but yeah. If we ever find that connection, because Kennedy's a very old name, like Murphy is, they'll be like, hey, and I was like, yeah, come to Jackie's house, but you know. So eventually they might find it, but it goes back really far. And since the Kennedys, the Massachusetts Kennedys were bootleggers at some time, I don't know that Annie would want that connection. I think she might be rolling on that one. Are there any other questions about anything at all?
Actually,
Yes, yes.
it's definitely, decidedly a Christian movement of Christian women. Were there any other religions involved? I'm thinking of the Jewish women, because Judaism is very dedicated to social justice issues.
So
Didn't hear any mention.
I haven't seen any connection other than a few rabbis who were involved, so at that point still male. So there probably were, but maybe they just weren't as vocal at the time. I haven't come across a lot of Jewish religion connection, but I will bet there was some involvement. The difference was, like, you know, the temperance women were going out, you know, praying in front of bars and that kind of stuff, and I don't see the Jews doing that. I think they'd be like, yeah, you know, we've got enough problems without drawing attention to ourselves, I think. So, but I haven't found other than males. So, more homework for me. Thank you. Anything else? I'm sorry that I kept bumping the microphone, and hopefully this thing wasn't messing up either. So, all right. Well, thank you very much.